Good morning, and welcome to the 10 Point, your daily guided tour through the best reporting and analysis from the Wall Street Journal. I'm your host, and today is Tuesday, July 28, 2026. We've got a packed edition, from rising tensions inside the Trump administration over childhood vaccines, to a surprising thaw in the president's relationship with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, to Meta staring down a legal mountain that could reshape the social media landscape. We'll also dig into the Fed's tricky week ahead, a booming explosives market, a Wisconsin governor's race getting shaken up, and why a totally smooth forehead is suddenly out of style. Let's dive in. We start this morning with two critical relationships for President Trump, and they couldn't be more different in tone. On one side, there's growing friction with his own Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. On the other, a noticeable warming toward Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after months of sharp criticism. Our colleague Leslie White has been digging into the vaccine story, and the reporting reveals a dynamic that White House political advisors had hoped to keep quiet at least until after the midterms. Here's the backdrop. Kennedy has long been known as a vaccine skeptic. When he joined the administration, the political team's calculation was straightforward: ask him to tone down his vaccine efforts, keep the issue off the front burner heading into a tough election cycle. But according to people familiar with the matter, the dynamic has flipped. It's now President Trump himself who's pushing to make the study of vaccines and autism a priority. Chief among his desires, these sources say, is reducing the number of shots that federal guidelines recommend for children. The thinking, as relayed to our reporters, is that Trump hopes to see autism rates drop as a result, even though any such effect, if it were to materialize, would take years to show up in the data. This has become a continuing point of tension between the president and his health secretary. The irony is palpable. The man who built a political brand on challenging establishment medicine now finds himself being pressed by the president to go further, faster, on an issue his own advisors wanted buried. And the midterms are looming. White House aides had hoped to downplay this precisely because vaccine policy cuts across the coalition Trump relies on suburban parents, working-class voters, skeptics of mandates. Pushing to cut back childhood shots could energize some corners of the base but alienate others, not to mention provoke a firestorm from the medical establishment. The reporting suggests Trump is willing to take that risk. Whether Kennedy, who built his career on exactly this fight, feels boxed in or empowered is the subplot to watch. Now, contrast that with Zelensky. For months, Trump's rhetoric toward the Ukrainian leader was biting, questioning his legitimacy, his gratitude, his willingness to make a deal. But lately, the tone has shifted. The newsletter points to our reporting on why Trump has warmed to Zelensky, and while the full piece lays out the diplomatic choreography, the headline is this: a lull in fighting between the US and Iran has accelerated diplomacy aimed at a short-term fix for the most contentious issue of the war. That's a mouthful, so let's unpack it. The US-Iran dynamic, always a background current in the broader conflict, has quieted enough to open a diplomatic window. And in that window, Trump and Zelensky have found common ground, or at least a mutually useful pause. The newsletter also notes that even at war, Ukrainian society is keeping Zelensky's presidential power in check, a reminder that he's not operating with a free hand domestically either. That constrains him, but it also makes him a more predictable partner for a Trump administration that values transactional clarity over ideological alignment. Let's hop across the pond for a moment of levity, and a reminder that institutions outlast politicians. Britain's politics may be, in the newsletter's words, a mess. But at number 10 Downing Street, there's a rare symbol of institutional continuity: the sound engineer, dubbed by the internet hot podium guy. He's become a minor cultural phenomenon: good looks, steady presence, the same voice at the lectern through prime ministers come and gone. In a time of churn, sometimes it's the person adjusting the microphone who embodies stability. A small thing, but a telling one. Now, to the day's other headlines. A lull in US-Iran fighting, as mentioned, is accelerating diplomacy on the war's most contentious issue. Though the newsletter doesn't specify which issue, the context suggests it's the nuclear file or perhaps the Strait of Hormuz security architecture. In New York City, building officials have halted work at another office-to-residential conversion, the second such project shut down this month over structural concerns. That's a blow to the adaptive reuse strategy cities are counting on to revive hollowed-out business districts. The business of explosives is booming, as Western governments unleash spending to bring production home, a story about supply chain sovereignty written in TNT and propellant. And in Wisconsin, Francesca Hong, a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, is shaking up the race to become the state's next governor. A progressive signal flare in a battleground that could decide Senate control. Markets next. Futures are mixed as of 6:15 a.m. Eastern. S&P 500 futures down a touch at 7,440. Dow futures up about 0.25% at 52,524. Nasdaq 100 futures off 0.8% at 27,958. The big event this week is the Federal Reserve meeting, and the outcome is unusually uncertain. Part of the reason? Chairman Kevin Warsh's signature move, he's saying less. The Fed's communication strategy has shifted toward deliberate opacity, fewer hints, fewer forecast dots, more data-dependent rhetoric that leaves markets guessing. That silence is itself a signal, and traders are parsing every comma. Meanwhile, Jonathan Wall has a column that cuts through the AI hype with a cold knife. Wall Street's forecasts for big tech, he writes, require a major leap of faith that the biggest AI hyperscalers can boost revenue much faster than the costs of running their businesses. The capital intensity is staggering. Data centers, chips, energy, cooling, and the revenue models are still, in many cases, aspirational. If the cost curve doesn't bend, the valuation math breaks. It's the kind of fundamental question that gets lost in the daily churn of earnings beats and product demos. Speaking of earnings and existential questions, Meta Platforms is facing what Aaron Mulvaney and Megan Bobrowski call one of the most serious legal threats of its 22-year history, and it couldn't come at a worse time. The company is navigating a tricky and costly transition to the AI era, planning up to $145 billion in capital spending this year, largely for chips and data centers. Earlier this year, it laid off 8,000 employees in part to fund those AI plans. Analysts expect Meta to report its first quarter of negative free cash flow when it announces second quarter earnings tomorrow. Against that backdrop, the lawsuits, a mountain of them, focused on social media's effects on teens and young adults, represent a potential financial and reputational cascade. A Meta spokeswoman said the company will continue to defend itself vigorously while focusing on safe experiences for teens. But the sheer volume of litigation, combined with the cash burn of the AI pivot, creates a pincer movement that few companies could absorb without strain. Let's shift gears to a story about a house, but not just any house. Darren Walker, president of Anonymous Content, didn't plan to buy in Los Angeles. Then he saw a Paul Revere Williams-designed home, and the perfect house changed his mind. He paid $4.2 million for it, filling the rooms with sleek furnishings and a curated collection of black art. Williams, the pioneering black architect who shaped so much of Southern California's mid-century elegance, gets a living steward in Walker. It's a story about preservation, taste, and the quiet power of placing history in the right hands. Happening today, the funeral service for Senator Lindsey Graham at the National Cathedral in Washington, a bipartisan farewell to a figure who straddled eras. Economic data, the Conference Board updates its Consumer Confidence Index. Sentiment ticked up last month, but the public mood remains near historic lows, a reminder that the vibration, if you will, isn't captured in GDP. And earnings, UPS, Boeing, Coca-Cola, Visa, Ford. A cross-section of the real economy reporting in the same hour. The number today is 69. That's the age of David Dino, Cracker Barrel's new CEO. The decision to tap the former Bloomin' Brands chief highlights a growing trend, boards calling in retired chief executives from the sidelines to engineer high-profile turnarounds. In recent years, Boeing, Verizon Communications, and others have all chosen once-retired CEOs. The logic is clear: you get experience without a learning curve, authority without career risk, and a mandate to make hard calls that a lifer might hesitate on. But it's also a signal: the bench of ready-now internal successors is thinner than boards like to admit. And finally, a completely smooth forehead is out. Strategic wrinkles are in. Since Botox was approved to temporarily reduce wrinkles in 2002, cosmetic neurotoxins have become so popular and widely accessible that a totally smooth countenance has lost some of its aspirational cachet. Now, clients 30 and older are seeking out dermatologists and estheticians with nursing degrees who can help them maintain a slight patina of wrinkles, just enough for furrowing and raising the brows. Expression, it turns out, is the new luxury. The frozen look read as wealth in 2010, in 2026, it reads as insecurity. The market has spoken, a little movement is the new status signal. Beyond the newsroom, two notes. In opinion, Dr. Fauci in his diaries comes across as all too human, stubborn, biased, vain, and vindictive. Yet the media and most of the political class treated him as a Solomonic sage. A reckoning with the gap between the man and the myth. And from Wall Street Journal by Side, the best financial advisors for retirees can help manage retirement income, create an estate plan, and reduce your tax burden. Practical guidance for the phase of life where the margin for error shrinks. That's your 10 point for Tuesday, July 28th. This newsletter was curated and edited by Morgan Smith and Will Horner in collaboration with editor-in-chief Emma Tucker. If you're not already a subscriber, you can sign up at wsj.com. For tips, feedback, or just to say hello, there's a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition. Have a good day.